how does a nation, born from a truly radical idea, navigate centuries of change, contradiction, and, well, constant reinvention?
That's a fantastic question, and it's really the core of what we're diving into today.
Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex topics and really pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge for you.
Indeed. We're embarking on a pretty comprehensive exploration of the United States, a journey we're kind of framing as the enduring experiment, America's journey then and now.
Right. So, looking at how this nation came into being and how its past stacks up against its present across, well, everything really. Geography, politics.
Society, the economy, its history, its culture. We're trying to cover the whole sweep.
And our mission today is basically to distill the core insights from a really fascinating document that contrasts America's origins with its contemporary reality.
Yeah, the aim is to give you a shortcut, a way to get well-informed about the profound shifts, but also the threads that persist that define the USA from its revolutionary birth right up to its current global standing.
It's amazing even just thinking about the term experiment.
Yeah.
Because it really was one, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. You have to put yourself back then. A world utterly dominated by monarchies, by inherited power. The idea of self-governance without a king where power genuinely resided with the people. That was audacious. It was radical.
It sounds almost unthinkable for the time.
It practically was. Our source material really hammers this home. This wasn't just a political tweak, it was a fundamental societal departure, a massive gamble against centuries of how things were done.
And this deep dive, it seems, is going to reveal the struggles and successes of that gamble.
Exactly. The enduring struggles, the undeniable successes, and how that initial experiment is frankly still testing its own boundaries and definitions even as we speak. It's never really stopped being an experiment.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where better to start than the very beginning? The geographical roots, the early society.
Makes sense, because when we think America, it's easy to jump straight to, say, the Pilgrims or the Revolutionaries.
Right, the usual starting points.
Yeah. But the land itself, it has a much deeper, far richer story than just European arrival. We really need to acknowledge that first.
So before the Europeans arrived?
Absolutely. Before any European colonization, this vast land was far from empty or undeveloped. It was buzzing with incredibly diverse Native American tribes. The Iroquois, the Cherokee, the Sioux, the Navajo, just to name a tiny fraction.
And these weren't just scattered groups wandering around.
Not at all. That's a crucial misconception to get past. Each of these groups possessed unique, often incredibly sophisticated systems of governance. They had distinct languages, complex spiritual beliefs, intricate societal structures that had evolved over millennia.
Wow. So, established civilizations.
Definitely. Often with advanced agricultural practices like the Iroquois Confederacy's Three Sisters farming and extensive trade networks crisscrossing the continent. This wasn't just empty land waiting for discovery.
It sounds more like a vibrant tapestry then. A whole mosaic of established societies already thriving, each with its own way of life.
That's a great way to put it. A sprawling mosaic. An understanding that fundamentally reframes the narrative, doesn't it? It wasn't a blank slate. It was a pre-existing, complex network of human societies that had long shaped the land and been shaped by it.
Which makes the arrival of European powers even more disruptive.
Profoundly disruptive. That's the next critical piece. The 1600s, the 1700s, that's when European powers, primarily Britain, but also France and Spain, start establishing their colonies.
And the British 13 colonies, the ones that became the U.S., they were mainly on the East Coast.
Exactly. Concentrated strategically along the eastern seaboard. Think Massachusetts, Virginia, New York, all hugging that Atlantic coast.
And the reasons they came, the motivations, were pretty mixed, weren't they? It wasn't just one thing.
No, it was a complex mix. Resource acquisition was huge, especially for Britain. They wanted timber, furs, agricultural goods like tobacco, later cotton, plus creating new markets for their own stuff.
And providing an outlet for their own population, I suppose.
Yes, land for a growing, sometimes restless population back home. Then you had groups seeking religious freedom, like the Puritans in Massachusetts.
Though, ironically, that freedom didn't always extend to others.
That's a critical point, yes. Often it was freedom for their specific brand of Protestantism. And then overarching all of this was the strategic game of empire building. Claiming land meant denying it to rivals like France or Spain, expanding their global reach.
It's fascinating how the land itself played a role, too. You mentioned the Appalachians.
Ah, yes. The physical geography was incredibly important. The Appalachian Mountains formed this significant natural barrier running parallel to the coast.
So you couldn't just easily push west right away?
Not easily, no.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, Spanish expansion in flatter territories, the mountains kind of contained the British colonies initially. It dictated the early direction of growth, keeping it focused eastward towards the sea, towards trade with Europe.
Which must have shaped their identity somehow. Maybe forced them to interact more with each other.
I think that's a really insightful point. It arguably forced the colonies to develop stronger internal connections and a shared identity, to some extent, before they really turned their gaze westward in a major way. It constrained their world, focused their economic activity on that coastal strip.
And hinted at future challenges, like building up pressure for westward expansion later on.
Exactly. That natural obstacle profoundly shaped how these colonies developed, fostering certain types of economies, and definitely created a pent-up demand for land. That desire for westward land would become a huge driver after independence, leading to all sorts of conflicts and shaping the idea of manifest destiny.
Okay, so that's the then. Now let's jump way forward to the now. The geographical picture is just unrecognizably different.
Oh, dramatically. It's almost dizzying to think about the change in scale. Today, the USA has expanded across the entire continent, 50 states stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
Plus Alaska and Hawaii, which really pushes the boundaries.
Right. Alaska and Hawaii underscore its global reach, really. Going from that thin coastal strip to a transcontinental nation, it just speaks volumes about American ambition, its evolving national identity.
What does that territorial growth signify, though, beyond just size?
Well, it's a story of relentless expansion, definitely. Driven by economic opportunity, strategic thinking, and often this powerful, almost quasi-religious belief in its own destiny, manifest destiny, as you mentioned.
But that expansion came at a huge cost, didn't it? For the people already there.
An immense and devastating cost for indigenous populations. It involves systematic displacement, countless broken treaties, outright violence. And it also reshaped relationships with other nations, like the war with Mexico, which led to acquiring vast territories in the Southwest. That expansion is central to the story, but it's a complex and often brutal part of it.
And the land itself. The sheer diversity within those borders now.
It's astounding. Our source material really emphasizes this. You've got vast forests in the Pacific Northwest, the expansive Great Plains, the towering Rocky Mountains, arid deserts in the Southwest, thousands of miles of coastline on 3 sides.
Which means incredibly varied climates, economies, even cultures within the one country.
Absolutely. It's not just scenery. This geographical diversity fuels different regional economies. Agriculture in the Midwest, tech in California, finance in the Northeast. It shapes lifestyles, politics, cultural identities. That regional diversity is a key feature of modern America.
And all this land and diversity translates into resources, right? Which links to its global power.
Directly. The USA is now one of the largest countries by land area, and crucially, it's among the most resource-rich globally. This vastness and resource abundance, fertile land, coal, oil, natural gas, minerals, it's all directly linked to its economic and political power.
How so?
Well, having those resources internally drove its industrial and agricultural development historically. It allowed it to become relatively self-sufficient early on, which provided a foundation for its massive economy and subsequently its geopolitical influence. It's a massive advantage on the world stage, especially now with increasing competition for resources.
So a huge geographical transformation from contained colonies to this continental behemoth. And that expansion, that sense of possibility, maybe set the stage for the political revolution.
I think there's a strong connection. Claiming the land wasn't just about territory, it became intertwined with the idea of forging a new destiny, a new form of governance, free from old European constraints.
Let's talk about that spark then, the move towards independence.
Right. So moving into the 1760s and 70s, that dissatisfaction with British rule really starts to intensify. And it crystallizes around that powerful phrase, taxation without representation.
Which we all learned in school, but sometimes it sounds a bit dry. It wasn't just about the money itself, was it?
Oh, not at all. I mean, yes, the specific acts like the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, those were the flashpoints, the things people protested against directly. But the underlying issue was much deeper, much more philosophical.
How so?
It tapped right into the core of Enlightenment thinking that was sweeping across Europe and the colonies. Thinkers like John Locke. The fundamental idea that legitimate government derives its authority from the consent of the governed.
So if you're going to tax us, we need to have a voice. We need elected representatives.
Exactly. The colonists felt that if they were to be taxed by Parliament, they needed people they elected sitting in that Parliament looking out for their interests. Without that, these weren't just taxes. They felt like fundamental infringements on their liberty, on their basic rights as Englishmen initially. It turned economic gripes into a fight over core principles.
And that escalated pretty quickly into actual war, the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783.
It did. Open conflict broke out. But what's really important here is why this revolution was different.
Different from other colonial revolts that had happened before.
Yes. Many earlier revolts were about changing rulers or maybe getting better terms within an existing empire. The American Revolution was fundamentally about establishing an entirely new political order. It wasn't just about kicking out the British king.
It was about getting rid of the whole idea of a king.
Precisely. It was a radical leap into republicanism based on ideas of popular sovereignty, individual liberty, and crucially, a written constitution limiting government power. That made it incredibly audacious for its time.
A blueprint, almost.
It really became a blueprint, inspiring other revolutions later on in France and Latin America. It dared to suggest that monarchy wasn't the only way, that people could actually govern themselves.
And out of that fire came these foundational documents, starting with the Declaration of Independence in 76.
Penned primarily by Thomas Jefferson, yes.
Right.
And the Declaration itself was revolutionary. It wasn't just a list of complaints against King George III, that would certainly included those.
It was more aspirational.
Much more. It was this bold assertion of inherent unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And crucially, it explicitly stated the right of the people to alter or abolish a government that became destructive of those ends.
That's a powerful statement, basically saying, if you mess up, we can overthrow you.
In essence, yes. It justified their rebellion not just to themselves, but to the world. And in doing so, it set this incredible precedent for future liberation movements, for struggles for self-determination and human rights that echoed down the centuries. Its language is still potent today.
But okay, they declare independence, they win the war, then they had to actually govern. And the first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, wasn't exactly a roaring success.
No, it really wasn't. It was their first stab at a national government, ratified in 1781, and it showed they were still learning, maybe overcorrecting.
Overcorrecting how?
Well, they were terrified of creating a strong central government like the British one they'd just fought. So the Articles created a very weak central government. It was more like a league of friendship between the states.
And that caused problems.
Big problems. The central government under the Articles couldn't effectively levy taxes, so it couldn't pay war debts or fund much of anything. It couldn't raise a national army easily. Each state had its own currency, its own trade rules. It led to economic chaos and squabbling between states.
Sounds unstable.
It was. Events like Shays' Rebellion and uprising of indebted farmers in Massachusetts really highlighted the weaknesses and the fear of anarchy. This instability directly led to the call for a new convention.
Which produced the Constitution in 1787. A very different beast.
Completely different. They realized they needed a stronger federal government, but still wanted to prevent tyranny. So they came up with this ingenious system based on separation of powers.
The three branches. Executive, legislative, judicial.
Exactly. Each with its own distinct powers, and crucially, with checks and balances on the others. The president could veto laws from Congress, but Congress could override the veto. The courts could review laws. It was designed to prevent any one part from becoming too dominant.
And federalism too, right? Dividing power between the national government and the states.
Yes, another key innovation. Federalism tried to strike that balance, a strong enough national government for defense and unity, but allowing states significant power over local matters. This whole structure, this Republican democracy, was still incredibly unusual in a world full of kings and emperors.
They were really betting on the people, weren't they?
They were. The founders made some bold assumptions about the capacity of an informed citizenry to govern itself responsibly. It was a massive political experiment, a real leap of faith based on Enlightenment ideals rather than historical precedent.
So that was the radical beginning. Now, fast forward again. How has that experiment held up?
Well, remarkably, in many ways. The USA today is a global superpower, and it stands as one of the world's oldest surviving democracies, still governed by that same constitution, albeit with amendments.
Which speaks to its resilience, doesn't it?
It really does. The fact that the Constitution has endured for over 2 centuries through civil war, economic depressions, world wars, massive social change, it's quite something.
What makes it so resilient? Is it just well written, or is there more to it?
It's Partly the framework itself, the separation of powers, the checks and balances provide stability. But arguably, the most crucial factor is its adaptability. The founders built in a mechanism for amendment, for change.
Allowing it to evolve over time.
Exactly. It's allowed the Constitution to bend without breaking, to incorporate changing societal values and address new challenges, things the founders couldn't possibly have foreseen, like, the internet or nuclear weapons. That adaptability, though sometimes slow and contentious, has been key to its survival.
And one of the biggest areas of evolution has been suffrage, right? Who gets to participate in this democracy?
Oh, absolutely critical. Democracy has expanded enormously since the founding era, when it was largely restricted to property-owning white men. Universal suffrage now includes women and racial minorities.
But that expansion wasn't just handed over, was it? It was fought for.
Fought for tooth and nail over decades and centuries. This is a vital part of the enduring experiment narrative. The journey to broader suffrage was long, arduous, and often met with fierce resistance. Think about the women's suffrage movement leading to the 19th Amendment in 1920.
Decades of struggle for that.
Decades. And the civil rights movement battling segregation and voter suppression, culminating in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which finally began to dismantle legal barriers for African Americans, especially in the South. These weren't just legislative tweaks. They were transformative moments born from immense struggle, fundamentally broadening who counts as we the people.
Yet, even with that progress, the political system today often seems incredibly divided, the two-party system.
Yes, the U.S. operates largely under this two-party system dominated by Democrats and Republicans. And our source material definitely highlights the deep political polarization that exists today. It's arguably sharper now than it has been in many decades.
Which must put a strain on those democratic institutions.
It certainly does. It raises challenging questions about governance, compromise, and societal cohesion. How does extreme polarization challenge the functioning of checks and balances or the legislative process? Yet at the same time,
The institutions still persist.
they do. Elections happen, power transfers, mostly peacefully, laws get made, courts function. The persistence of these institutions, even under immense strain and division, perhaps speaks to a certain underlying strength or resilience in the system itself. It's constantly being tested, maybe now more than ever, showing both its vulnerabilities and its capacity to endure.
Okay, so the political framework has evolved, expanded, and is still being tested. Let's shift to the people within that framework, the society itself. Early America sounds like a very different place socially.
Radically different. Our source paints a clear picture. Early American society was overwhelmingly white, Protestant, and dominated by men. So a clear hierarchy, very clear. Power, wealth, legal rights, they were concentrated in the hands of this specific demographic, mostly of Northern European descent. It wasn't anything like the melting pot idea we talk about now. It was a society built with specific groups holding privilege and others systematically excluded or subordinated.
And the most glaring exclusion, the deepest contradiction, was slavery.
Absolutely. You can't understand early America, especially the South, without confronting slavery. It wasn't peripheral. It was a central, deeply entrenched part of the Southern economy, shaping its entire social, economic, and political structure.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? A nation founded on liberty while enslaving millions.
It's the fundamental paradox, the crucial tension at the heart of the American experiment. How do you reconcile proclaiming all men are created equal while upholding chattel slavery, treating human beings as property? This contradiction didn't just lead to the Civil War. Its legacy continues to shape debates about race, inequality, and justice today.
And other groups faced exclusion too.
Definitely. Native Americans, as we touched on earlier, faced systematic displacement, forced assimilation, broken treaties, and violence as settlers pushed west. Their lands were taken, their cultures suppressed.
And women.
Women, regardless of race or class, had very few legal rights compared to men. They generally couldn't vote, own property independently if married, access higher education, or participate fully in public life. The legal and social structures were designed to keep them in a subordinate position.
So this idea of freedom and equality was, at the start, very narrowly defined.
Extremely narrowly defined. The systemic exclusion of enslaved people, Native Americans, and women starkly contradicted the stated ideals. And these early exclusions created deep-seated, long-term legacies of inequality in wealth, opportunity, political power that the nation is still grappling with centuries later.
Okay, stark picture then. But now, jump to today, and the U.S. looks completely different demographically.
It's a world away, a truly remarkable transformation. The U.S. is now one of the most multicultural nations on Earth. It's this vibrant, complex mosaic.
With large communities from all over.
Huge communities of African Americans whose ancestors were brought here enslaved, Hispanic Latino Americans with roots in Latin America, Spain, and indigenous cultures, Asian Americans representing a vast array of countries and cultures, plus immigrants and their descendants from literally every corner of the globe.
That demographic shift must be one of the defining features of modern America.
Absolutely. Immigration, both historically and currently, has continuously reshaped American identity, bringing new languages, foods, religions, perspectives. This diversity is dynamic, constantly evolving, adding new layers to the national narrative, creating both incredible richness and, sometimes, friction.
And much of the progress towards embracing this diversity, legally and socially, came through those civil rights movements you mentioned earlier.
Yes, those movements are absolutely crucial chapters in the story of the enduring experiment. They represent society's capacity, however flawed and incomplete, for self-correction. They show the ongoing struggle to make the nation live up to its own founding ideals.
Can you give examples of their impact?
Well, the 1960s civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., directly confronted legal segregation and disenfranchisement, leading to landmark laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These didn't solve everything overnight, but they fundamentally changed the legal landscape.
And women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights.
Similar stories of struggle and progress. Women's rights movements fought for everything from the vote to equal pay, reproductive rights, and challenging workplace discrimination. The LGBTQ+ rights movement has fought for recognition against discrimination and achieved major victories like marriage equality. These movements show that progress often comes from sustained pressure from below, from people demanding their rights.
But as always with this experiment, it's not a finished story. Challenges remain.
Definitely not finished. Our source is clear on this. Despite the incredible progress, significant ongoing issues persist. Systemic racism continues to manifest in areas like policing, housing, and wealth accumulation. Income inequality has widened dramatically in recent decades, and social and political polarization often runs along these fault lines.
So the experiment is still very much in progress, still facing fundamental questions.
Absolutely. These persistent challenges show how complex it is to achieve genuine equality and justice in such a diverse nation. How the country confronts or fails to confront these issues shapes the current national conversation and will undoubtedly shape the next chapter of the American experiment.
Okay, from the evolving face of society, let's turn to the economy. The engine driving so much of this change, what did that look like back then?
Then, the early American economy was overwhelmingly agrarian. Farming was king, but there was a really stark division within that.
The North-South divide again.
Yes, primarily. The South's economy was dominated by slavery-based agriculture. Large plantations growing cash crops like cotton, tobacco, rice, sugar, all incredibly labor-intensive and reliant on the forced labor of millions of enslaved people. This system shaped everything in the South, its social structure, its politics, its entire way of life.
And the North?
The North was developing differently. While still agricultural, it also had growing centers of trade, shipping, fishing, and early small-scale industry milling, textiles, shipbuilding. Its economy was more diversified, based on free labor, and increasingly oriented towards commerce.
And these different economic models fuel the tension between them.
Hugely. They created fundamentally different societies with conflicting interests, especially regarding things like tariffs, which the industrializing North often favored and the export-reliant South opposed, and most explosively, the question of whether slavery should expand into new Western territories. These economic differences were a major cause of the eventual Civil War.
And the overall financial system was pretty basic back then.
Very basic, even chaotic. The nation was heavily reliant on exporting a few key agricultural commodities, which made it vulnerable to price swings in Europe. And there was no unified financial infrastructure.
No single currency.
Not effectively. States issued their own money, banks issued their own notes, the value fluctuated wildly. Imagine trying to do business across state lines. It was complicated and unstable. This lack of a stable, unified system was a major economic struggle for the new nation.
But they took a step towards fixing that with the first Bank of the United States.
Yes, established in 1791, championed by Alexander Hamilton. This was a really big deal and very controversial at the time.
Why controversial?
Because it represented a move towards a stronger, more centralized federal government having influence over the economy. People like Jefferson feared it would give too much power to financiers and the federal government at the expense of farmers and states' rights. It was part of that fundamental debate about federal power that started right at the beginning.
But it was seen as necessary for stability.
Hamilton argued successfully that it was essential for managing government debt, creating a stable national currency, and fostering economic development. It was a crucial, if contested, step towards building a more unified national economy.
Okay, now let's leap to the economic now.
Yeah.
From agrarian and disorganized to, well, a global giant.
An absolute giant. Today, the USA boasts the largest economy in the world by nominal GDP. The sheer scale and influence are hard to overstate.
What does being the largest economy actually mean in practice?
It means immense domestic market size, huge consumer spending power, leading roles in global trade and finance, and a massive capacity for innovation that often sets global trends. It's a foundation of its international political and military influence as well.
And the sectors driving it have totally changed from tobacco and timber.
Completely. While agriculture is still important and highly productive, the dominant sectors now are things like technology. Think Silicon Valley, software, biotech, finance, Wall Street, banking, investment, the military-industrial complex, defense contractors, aerospace, and a massive service and consumer economy.
So a shift from making things to, well, tech and services.
Largely, yes. Tech and finance have become incredibly powerful drivers, replacing traditional manufacturing and agriculture as the main engines of growth. And the concept of the consumer economy, where individual spending makes up a huge chunk of economic activity, really shapes American life and global production chains.
And the financial system is now highly developed.
Oh, incredibly sophisticated. You have the Federal Reserve System, the Fed as the central bank, created later in 1913. Its job is to manage the money supply, influence interest rates, and try to maintain economic stability, a hugely powerful and complex task.
And the U.S. dollar's role.
That's critical. The U.S. dollar is the world's primary reserve currency. That means central banks around the world hold dollars, and major international commodities like oil are priced in dollars. This gives the U.S. significant economic advantages, sometimes called an exorbitant privilege, like being able to borrow more cheaply.
It sounds like a system built for innovation, too.
Yes, the U.S. economy is fundamentally a capitalist one, characterized by strong property rights, relatively free markets, and a culture that generally encourages innovation and entrepreneurship. That dynamism is a key feature.
But inevitably, there are challenges here, too, in the now.
Always. The experiment continues, flaws and all. Our source points to major economic challenges today. Rising national debt is a persistent concern. Wealth inequality has grown significantly, with a widening gap between the very rich and everyone else. And worries about inflation impacting everyday costs are often front and center.
So even with this powerhouse economy, there are serious stresses and strains within it.
Absolutely. These challenges raise big questions about fairness, opportunity, social cohesion, and the long-term sustainability of the current model. How do you balance dynamism with stability and equity? That's an ongoing part of the economic experiment.
Okay, we've covered geography, politics, society, economy. Let's look at the broad sweep of history and culture, how the narrative arc unfolded and how expression changed.
Right. Seeing the historical phases helps tie it all together. Our source gives a kind of snapshot timeline, showing how the nation was constantly being reshaped.
So starting before 76.
Pre-1776, you have those diverse indigenous civilizations, then European colonization arrives, setting up conflict and laying the groundwork. Then, 1776 to 1789, that foundational moment, independence, the Revolutionary War, hammering out the Constitution, the birth of the Republic.
Followed by a period of growth and intense conflict.
Yes, the 1790s to the 1860s were defined by rapid westward expansion, often displacing Native Americans, and the escalating, unavoidable debates over slavery. This culminated in the Civil War, 1861 to 65, the absolute crucible that tested whether the nation could even survive its core contradiction.
And after the war.
1865 to 1900. Reconstruction, the complex and ultimately failed attempt to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people, alongside continued westward settlement, the closing of the frontier, and the explosion of industrialization, creating new forms of wealth and poverty.
Then the 20th century brought global engagement and crises.
Big time. 1900 to 1945. America gets drawn into 2 world wars, shifting it away from isolationism, and endures the Great Depression, which fundamentally changed the relationship between the government and the economy. massive global and domestic upheavals.
And the second half of the century.
1945 to 1991, dominated by the Cold War against the Soviet Union, solidifying its global superpower status. But also, internally, the transformative civil rights movement challenging racial segregation and inequality, a period of immense global tension and profound domestic change.
Then a brief moment after the Cold War.
A very brief one, really. 1991 to 2001 is often seen as this period of post-Cold War, unchallenged U.S. dominance, the unipolar moment.
Which ended abruptly.
Ended abruptly on September 11th, 2001. So 2001 to 2020 becomes defined by terrorism, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the war on terror, and alongside that, the incredible acceleration of the digital revolution, changing everything about communication, work, and life.
And that brings us pretty much up to date.
Right. 2020 to the present. Marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, intense political polarization, renewed social justice movements, and a sense of global rebalancing as powers like China rise. It's the latest, very complex, very challenging chapter of this ongoing experiment. Each phase just threw up new tests, new opportunities, constantly forcing reinvention.
Looking specifically at culture now, what were the influences back then?
Then, early American culture, especially its literature and political thought, was deeply influenced by the European Enlightenment. We mentioned Locke before, but also thinkers like Rousseau, Montesquieu.
Their ideas about rights, government, reason.
Exactly. Those philosophies provided the intellectual toolkit, the justification for the revolution and for designing the new republic. Ideas about natural rights, the social contract, separating government powers, they found very fertile ground in America and became central to its self-image.
And the writers of the time reflected this.
Very much so. Key figures like Benjamin Franklin, with his focus on pragmatism and self-improvement. Thomas Paine, whose fiery pamphlets like Common Sense were massively influential in pushing for independence. James Madison, articulating the principles of the new government in the Federalist Papers.
Their writing wasn't just art, it was nation building.
Absolutely. It revolved around themes of liberty, virtue, the relationship with nature, and the very practical challenges of building a new nation based on these radical ideas. Their works were foundational texts, shaping how early Americans understood themselves and their project.
Now, fast forward again. America's cultural influence today is, well, it's everywhere.
It's immense. A global cultural powerhouse is not an exaggeration. Think about the reach of Hollywood films, American music genres, jazz, blues, rock, hip-hop, popular literature, fashion trends. American culture is consumed worldwide.
A form of soft power.
Definitely. It projects American ideas, values, lifestyles, both good and bad, arguably, across the globe, often more effectively than diplomacy or military might. It shapes perceptions, creates connections, and sometimes generates friction or resistance.
And the voices within American culture have become much more diverse, haven't they?
Hugely so. Reflecting that multicultural society we talked about, you have incredibly powerful literary voices exploring diverse experiences. Think Toni Morrison on the African-American experience, James Baldwin on race and identity, Jhumpa Lahiri on the immigrant story, and so many others. The perspectives have broadened dramatically from those early days.
And the way culture is shared has changed too.
Completely revolutionized by technology. We've gone from books and maybe theater to film, radio, television, and now podcasts, streaming services, YouTube, social media like TikTok. This has democratized creation and consumption in many ways.
Allowing more voices to be heard.
Potentially, yes. It bypasses traditional gatekeepers, allowing individuals and groups to share their stories and perspectives directly on a global stage. It's faster, more fragmented, more participatory.
But this explosion of expression brings its own challenges, right? Debates about free speech.
Yes, that's a key point in our source material. Freedom of expression remains a core American value enshrined in the First Amendment, but its boundaries are constantly being debated and contested, especially in the digital age.
Things like cancel culture, political correctness.
Those are the terms often used. There are intense debates about accountability versus censorship, about harmful speech versus free expression, about the role of social media platforms in moderating content. It raises difficult questions. Where are the lines in a hyper-connected world? How do you balance liberty with the potential for harm? These debates show the ongoing struggle over values and identity within the experiment.
Okay, final big area. America's place in the world, its international position.
Yeah.
Then it started as a pretty small fry, didn't it?
Very small fry. Initially, the U.S. was just this minor colonial breakaway, a rebellious upstart. It faced huge challenges just getting recognized and respected by the established European powers, who were mostly monarchies and empires, deeply skeptical of this Republican experiment.
It had to prove itself.
It really did prove its viability, its stability, its ability to actually function as a nation.
And its early foreign policy was quite cautious. Stay out of trouble.
Largely isolationist, yes. George Washington's farewell address famously warned against getting entangled in permanent alliances, especially with European powers. The thinking was, we're a new fragile nation. Let's focus on building ourselves up internally, avoid getting dragged into Europe's endless wars.
Which makes sense for a young country.
It was probably pragmatic. This policy shaped its early interactions, allowing it to consolidate and expand across North America without too much foreign interference initially. But it still had to constantly fight for respect, for fair trade terms, for securing its borders against British, French, and Spanish interests that lingered in the Americas.
Now, jump to the present. Isolationism is long gone.
Long, long gone. The big turning point was really World War II. After 1945, the USA emerged not just as a victor, but as a dominant global power, a hegemon. And crucially, it didn't retreat back into isolationism.
It actively shaped the post-war world.
Actively and decisively. It played a leading role in creating the key international institutions that still shape our world. The United Nations, the NATO military alliance, financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank.
Why build all that?
It was about creating a stable, predictable international order that would prevent another world war, promote democracy and capitalism, and yes, consolidate American influence. It was a shift from staying out to setting the rules of the game.
And its military presence reflects that global role.
Undeniably. Maintaining military bases in over 80 countries, that's a staggering footprint. It signifies global reach, the ability to project power, protect trade routes, and respond to crises far from its shores. It's a core part of its global strategy, but also a source of international debate and a huge financial cost.
But that dominant position isn't quite as unchallenged as it was, say, 30 years ago.
No, the global landscape is shifting. The U.S. now faces significant economic, technological, and geopolitical competition, particularly from a rising China, but also from other powers like India, Russia, and regional blocs.
So a move towards a more multipolar world.
That seems to be the trend. This competition challenges America's long-held dominance and forces it to navigate a much more complex world order. It's no longer the sole superpower in the way it was briefly after the Cold War.
And this creates new dilemmas for the U.S.
Yes, complex ones. Our source mentions concerns about imperial overstretch. Is the U.S. spread too thin globally, draining resources needed at home? There's the constant tension between multilateralism, working with allies and institutions, versus a more nationalist America First approach.
Which plays out in debates about trade, alliances.
Exactly. And then there are huge transnational challenges like climate change, where U.S. leadership is critical, but often complicated by domestic politics and international disagreements. How it balances its interests, its values, and its responsibilities in this changing world is a major test for the experiment today.
So we've really traced an incredible journey. From that initial fragile experiment on the coast.
To this continent-spanning, incredibly diverse, powerful, and complex nation. From indigenous lands and colonial outposts to a global superpower grappling with polarization at home and competition abroad.
From a society built on hierarchy and exclusion.
To a multicultural one striving often imperfectly towards greater equality, still wrestling with the legacies of slavery and discrimination.
From a simple agrarian economy.
To the world's largest, most technologically advanced economic engine facing challenges of inequality and debt.
And from enlightenment, ideas debated in pamphlets.
To global cultural influence spread through TikTok and Hollywood while debating the very nature of free expression. It really underscores that core idea. America was born from a radical concept.
That people could govern themselves. No king needed.
Right. But its journey has been riddled with those profound contradictions we kept hitting on. Freedom versus slavery. Innovation versus inequality. Opportunity versus exclusion.
These are just historical footnotes, are they? They seem like fundamental tensions baked into the experiment itself.
I think they are. They've driven conflict, progress, debate, and reform throughout American history. They are the fault lines along which the experiment has constantly been tested and reshaped.
It really is a story of constant reinvention, isn't it? From the founders to Silicon Valley, from the Civil War to the War on Terror, Ambition and struggle seem like constants.
Absolutely. It's a story that reveals both the power of its founding ideals and the depths of its flaws and failures to live up to them. A testament to both aspiration and hypocrisy, sometimes in the same breath.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like the experiment is still very much alive, still facing huge questions.
Definitely. Our source suggests it faces profound existential questions today about the health of its democracy, about how to hold together its diverse identity in an age of polarization, about the ongoing pursuit of justice. But despite all that,
It remains hugely influential, a key player.
undeniably,
Yeah.
a crucial, ongoing experiment in self-governance and a leading force, for better or worse, in shaping the modern world. So, maybe the final thought for you listening is this: reflecting on this incredible, complicated journey. What stands out to you? What do you see as the most defining characteristic of this enduring American experiment? And maybe even, what might its next great reinvention look like in the face of all these challenges we've discussed?